Good morning, everybody. Welcome to this technical briefing, Navigating the Building Safety Act with AtkinsRéalis. I'm Emily Gabb. I'm Head of Strategic Partnerships at NLA, and it's great to see so many of you joining on this very cold and rainy Friday morning. For those of you that don't know, NLA is London's built environment community. We're a cross-sector membership organisation for everyone committed to shaping a better city. So the event this morning is part of our technical programme, and our speakers are going to be giving a current view on the impact of the Building Safety Act, most notably around the amendments to building regulations that came into effect last October and the effect that they're having on the industry and projects. This is a really timely session, actually, as we've now kind of moved into phase 2 of the Grenfell inquiry, which was sort of issued earlier this month. So joining us this morning, we have got Arita Morris, who is Director at Child, Grad & Lewis and Chair of the NLA's Technical Competence Expert Panel. We've got Supay Choi, who is Head of Design at Kier London, Luke Brooker, Head of Delivery at Unite Students, and on the Atkins team, we've got Richard Glazard, who is Regional Director and Head of Health and Safety Services for London and the South East, Evan Sleeman, Associate Director, George Parker, Associate Director and Lead Building Safety Consultant, and Stephen Workman, who is Technical Director and Residential Sector National Lead. So we've got two parts to the session this morning. First of all, the Atkins team are going to take us through their approach to incorporating the Building Safety Act requirements, and then we'll move into a panel discussion with our other guests. There will be an opportunity to ask questions at the end of the session. So if you look on the lower bar of the Zoom screen, there is a little Q&A button. So start thinking about your questions and get those in there, and we will have a chance to review those with the speakers at the end. We're also going to host a poll at the end of the session. So please do make sure to stick around and just answer those questions. Feedback is super useful for us in putting these events together. So I'd now like to welcome Stephen Workman, who is going to kick us off for the beginning of the session. So Stephen, over to you.
Thanks, Emily. Hopefully I'm off mute, which will be a good start. So I'm just going to talk for about 5 minutes on how we at AtkinsRéalis have reacted and organised ourselves around the changes that have occurred, particularly since the amendments to the building regulations came into force in October 23. But just before I start, I just want to echo your thanks to Arita, Supay and Luke for giving up their time to join us today on this webinar. So as a business, we've been looking at the impact of this since really the Building Safety Bill was announced 4 years ago. We created a steering group, which includes representation from legal, commercial, insurance, health and safety and senior leaders from across the business, as well as representation from our core disciplines. So the purpose of that steering group is to act as a sounding board for investment and training, as an example, reviewing opportunities and discussing impacts to the business, and we meet on a fairly regular basis. We then also have a series of working groups, which have been broken into business critical, upskilling and continual application. And again, they meet on a regular basis. So one of the primary outcomes that we had to focus on at the outset was to establish whether AtkinsRéalis could offer the principal designer duty holder role and in what circumstances we'd be able to do that. And then what processes and information we needed to put in place to enable the business to proceed in a structured and importantly a consistent manner. That consistency is important given the size and breadth of our business, but Richard's going to touch on that in a little bit more detail later, particularly around the development of standard scopes, T's and C's, things like fee proposals, competency statements and competency assessments. But some of the other output from these groups include setting up specific sites on our intranet where all information is available to our staff, issuing regular building safety bulletins, particularly during that 22-23 period when there were quite a few developments happening regularly to keep our staff updated. And we've delivered numerous business-wide webinars over the last 8 months, and we've been very lucky that we've had approximately an average attendance of about 800 to 900 on each of those. So really, that purpose is to keep our staff as updated as we possibly can. So another output was to establish a flowchart covering the process from an inquiry coming into us right through to commencement of work, or in fact, our clients asking us to perform that PD rule midway through a project. And we need to ensure, or the purpose of that is to ensure that we have the appropriate governance in place at the right times. And again, that comes back to this consistency point. So we need to ensure that we've got individuals not, or avoiding individuals offering roles that AtkinsRéalis shouldn't or couldn't be doing, because again, that's the purpose of these new duty holders, or agreeing to scopes or terms and conditions that we felt wouldn't be reasonable. Also, we needed to make our clients aware of their duties. So the production of a standard letter, identification of project directors, because we wanted to avoid clients receiving multiple letters from different people within the same organisation. So I touched on it earlier, in what circumstance would AtkinsRéalis be PD? And for us, we felt, having read a lot of the information, that the HUC guidance, which is based on PAS 8671, that really the PD should have an influence on or be able to control the design, was important to us. So we've concluded that if we are the lead consultant, or in some circumstances providing multi-D engineering services, for example, then we'd be in a position to fulfill that role. However, in each of those circumstances, we need to be clear that we have a competent person, identification of a competent person that has the availability and capacity to fulfill that duty. In every case, it would be AtkinsRéalis would be appointed as the PD by the client, and then we would name a competent individual to fulfill that role on our behalf. Now, as we're all aware, the amendments to the building regulations, October 23, affects all buildings that building regulations apply to. And we work across a number of internal divisions, across a wide variety of client organisations, and have a wide variety of disciplines and specialists. Now, recently, quite a lot of the work that we've been doing is to help projects determine and to what extent the building regulations apply. Now, some of our clients include people like MOPAC, Civil Aviation Authority, the UK AEA, which is the Atomic Energy Agency, where buildings can be exempt under Schedule 2, or them as clients are exempt under Schedule 2. And we also have projects that are exempt under Schedule 2, such as various bits of tidal barriers, retrofit, refurbishment to certain extents. And again, you've got regulations applying to different extents. So a lot of the work that we've been doing is to help our project leads and projects determine to which extent the regulations apply. Now, we also do a range of projects. So we've talked about reglazing of single classrooms all the way through to new builds, new build HRBs, and major refurbishments. So, and we have a range of disciplines going from architecture, MEP, structure civils, building surveyors, fire, facade, PM, QS, CDMA, and in some instances via Ida Roth, we would also operate as a client. Therefore, we've got a wide variety of scenarios within the business that we need to assist with. However, again, I'd like to point out that it's always the client who determines and confirms the extent to which the regulations apply. But because of that wide variety of disciplines, one of the other tasks of the working groups was always to liaise with the professional bodies, such as RIBA, RICS, CIOB, CIAT, CIBSE, etc. So again, we're keeping on top of what's changing, such as the ARB bringing out a new code of conduct. Again, we need to then fold that back into the business. Within building design, which is where I sit within architecture, we've got around 1,000 professionals, 500 of which are in the architecture, master planning and landscape practice. So the management of competence needs to be well organised. An example is it's not feasible for us to have all 500 architects on the RIBA PD register. Therefore, the approach that we've taken to organise ourselves is to identify a small number of colleagues from across our main studios that would act as an arbiter or a moderator of competence. And they, whenever people fulfil the competence assessment, which Richard will talk about, their role is to moderate it, to make sure that, again, we're being fair. The other thing the business has done is to invest quite heavily in training. So we've identified the CABE training course, which is the Chartered Association of Building Engineers. They have prepared a building surveying course, really for people that want to become approved inspectors. And that's to give that wide range of disciplines a more in-depth knowledge of what the building regulations actually are, what the approved documents are. And we've got more people going on that training soon. So I'm just going to hand over to Richard Clazzard now, who's going to talk about our approach to the production of some of those key information. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephen. So as Stephen mentioned at AtkinsRéalis, we have lots of different disciplines within our organisation. With the Building Safety Act, I think from the early sort of stages, we saw it as a great opportunity really to collaborate more across our business and to start mapping out our design disciplines, our technical communities, so that we can take an organisational approach where we're going to be delivering the building regulations PD role, and to also get some consistency in how we approach that role as well, because it's quite an important thing that we deliver a consistent approach to everything across our business. It's such a big business. As part of the Building Safety Act steering group, what we've done is produce a company-wide competency statement that follows the principles of BS 8670. It pulls together the career progression frameworks, the quality assurance processes, the project governance processes that we've got in place. It provides access to subject matter experts as well, and demonstrates that we've got those people on point to be able to help people in the company where we need to. And company-wide capability really as well. It maps that out and it demonstrates that we are organisationally competent. We've got all these different disciplines that we can bring together in a collaborative way to be able to help us get through the challenges that we've got now. Because we're being asked by clients to demonstrate competence as well, not just for where we're proposing to act as the building regulations principal designer, but also our project managers, our cost managers, our building surveyors, our designers. We're going through the process currently of mapping out individual discipline competence to make sure that we're putting the right people on the projects that that's regardless of the role or the project that we're working on. Now, for us, it's important to be able to demonstrate that the person that we're putting forwards to manage the responsibilities of the BRPD on a project or any role is competent. But looking at the BRPD role, what we did was develop our own internal competency framework. It's weighted against PAS 8671, which is the standard for competence, organisational competence for principal designers, and it uses that as the basis. Responses to the questions in those framework need to be backed by evidence by the person that's completing it. So it would be charterships, it would be qualifications, experiential evidence. It's to make sure that the person that is filling it in has the necessary training, experience, qualifications, and that it's relevant to the type of project that they're being put forward for. And also as well, there's specific Building Safety Act and Building Regulation Amendment regulations training that needs to form part of that, so they understand what the role is as well. The scoring, as Stephen just mentioned, is moderated by practice heads of disciplines, senior technical leaders, and people that are aligned to one of the chartered bodies registers. So there's a consistent approach to that as well, making sure that we're being sure about the people that we're putting forward. We developed our own approach for the early days because we were aware that many of the industry bodies weren't yet able to map out their routes for competency for either design disciplines or for the BRPD role. But we're now seeing that, and we have been seeing that for a while now with REBA, with CIAT, with the APS for the BRPD role, and the Association of Project Management, CABE, and CIOB for project managers. And we'll be looking to those bodies, for further assurance of competence, further means of being able to assure competence and to be able to assist us in developing that sort of competency frameworks going forwards. But the thing we found probably is that the focus has always tended to be on HRB projects, and the greater proportion of the work that we do within AtkinsRéalis is non-HRB. And so a lot of it might not need a chartered architect. It might be that we're working with a specific the works will be specified by a mechanical or electrical engineer, data centres, for instance. It might be building surveyors where they're specifying and providing the work and project managing the work a lot of the time. We have a lot of building surveyors delivering that type of role. So the approach that we take towards competence needs to be proportionate to the type of project that we're doing. Now, AtkinsRéalis as a business have been really supportive, I would say, in providing the time and the investment to allow us to be able to develop the processes and procedures that we need, as well as the upskilling work, processes and procedures that we need, as well as the time to be able to upskill people within the organisation. Working with CABE, we held dedicated building regulations training sessions, which were 8 days over 2 weeks, and that was for 40 people in the business, and we've got another series of that coming up in the not too distant future, hopefully. We've also employed an ex-head of building control who is a registered building control inspector as a building safety consultant, and we're looking to bring more into the business to provide us with that specialist knowledge, and you'll hear from George in a little while. It's been important that we upskill and provide general awareness training to everybody within the business, as regardless of their role on the project. They're working in construction and they're working with our clients, and our clients need to know that the regulations very likely apply to their project. There's been a lot of confusion, I'd say, over the last year, with the two main areas that we found being that the CDM PD is being appointed as the building regs PD role. And we found that going in on building control applications. We've had to correct that with our clients in some instances, and that the regs don't apply because it's not an HRB. So hopefully, as we go on, these sorts of areas confusion will go, and people will get a better understanding of what's going on. But for us, we presented to well over 100 clients now on the changes, as well as Stephen mentioned, issuing client duties letters. Again, that goes back to being regardless of our role. It's about making sure our clients are clear and aware of their responsibilities. So as well as it being incredibly important that we have competent people to be able to do the role within the company and to be able to support us in the company, we've had to work really hard through the steering group to develop the templates and the guidance that we need to ensure a consistent approach to delivering the role. Some of the tools and templates we've developed, a building regulations compliance tracker. A lot of these are fairly standard. They'll vary slightly in how they look, but essentially they're doing the same thing. They're making sure that the project is compliant with the relevant requirements under the building regulations, and that's being demonstrated through the project. Also, we thought about how do you plan, manage, and monitor the design, or matters relating to the design. So we produced a design execution plan, and this sort of sets out roles and responsibilities. It sets out deliverables at what stages within the project. It sets out quality assurance and checking processes, escalation measures. It's a template document that can be completed with guidance built into it. So it demonstrates clearly how the project will plan, manage, and monitor the design for the project. A fee builder spreadsheet as well, because what we're seeing is a massive variance in fees across the market at the moment. We're finding that from our project management colleagues who are procuring BRPD services for their projects they're working on, and just generally industry awareness that the rates are really varying. So what we've tried to do is build up a rate or a fee based upon the deliverables that are required under the regulation. It also factors in the ability to be able to resource from other areas within the business. So if we have to bring in a fire engineer to look at a particular part of the design, that fee is built into that through the tracker. Standard scopes of services as well, standard letters and guidance notices, and as Stephen mentioned earlier, legal and commercial guidelines, so that when we're reviewing the projects we're taking on, we're making sure that we're in the right position to take them on. We've got the right people available. The terms and conditions are fair and are reasonable. And that's quite key to us. As I said a few times, we're a big organisation, so our risk exposure is a lot greater because we have a lot of people working across a lot of projects. So we need to A, make that consistent approach, and B, make sure that we're only taking on work that we're comfortable taking on, that we're competent to take on, and that there are reasonable terms and conditions in place. So hopefully you'll see it's taken a lot of work to get us to where we are. I say we weren't helped probably by the speed that secondary legislation came out, considering the volume of it. We had a very short space of time to review it, and I think it probably put us and probably a lot of people in the industry on the back foot. I know that the Building Safety Regulator will argue that the Building Safety Act was there, that there were other things there to tell us what was going to happen, consultation process, for instance, but it was the detail of the secondary legislation that we needed, and it took us a little bit of time to digest that and to be able to put it into a plan, really. But the few things I'd say that have helped us as an organisation, a supportive company willing to commit money, time, and resource for us to be able to do this has been really important, and that's, I think, starting to pay off now. An invested team of people from across the company that are willing to collaborate and work together. I think it's definitely one of the biggest exercises I think I've done within the business, where we've worked a lot more across the business, and listening also to what's going on in the industry and collaborating on views and opinions wherever possible. And that's why I think these sorts of events are really important. So I will hand over now to my next speaker.
Yeah, thanks, Richard. So we work with a number of clients who either own or manage high-rise buildings, and as we saw this change in legislation starting to develop and be introduced, we naturally started the process of upskilling and trying to understand the changes for ourselves. And in doing so, we started communicating this to the clients that we're working with, specifically focus on how these changes are likely to impact them, and try to assist them through these changes, basically. So this comprised of CPD sessions, providing advice, guidance, and general day-to-day support on any queries and concerns they were likely to have. And this in turn created the role of a Building Safety Act client advisor that we've recently been delivering. So to give you some idea of what this role comprises, so the communication of client duties under the Building Safety Act and building regulations, providing advice on technical competency requirements, specifically focusing on the recent PAS documents that have been released, providing guidance on the gateway process and the associated relevant requirements, providing guidance relating to correspondence with the building safety regulator, and also providing guidance on client duties to comply with the golden thread of information. And a sole aim and focus for this role was, as I said, to focus it on the client, ensuring that they were kept informed and aware of their duties. Lastly, just to kind of summarize this point, but also emphasize how we as AtkinsRéalis believe this role can be so beneficial and worthwhile. We recently were sent through some stats relating to the Gateway 2 application, which we believe quite interesting, and it's worth communicating on this call. So currently, out of the 1001 applications received for Gateway 2 approval, we've seen 50 of these being withdrawn. We've seen 313 returned as being considered to be invalid. 23 have been rejected. 146 are still awaiting information. 320 under review, and 2 are awaiting case officers to be appointed on these, with 147 out of that 1001 being approved. And in terms of time duration that this has taken, so for those 147 that have been approved, the average time from receipt to approval, they've estimated this to be around roughly 16 weeks. So, and Luke Brooker's on the call here, and we've seen examples where this has been far greater than the 16 weeks, which I'm sure he'll talk about in a moment. But to summarize, with these delays that we're already seeing associated with the Gateway 2 application, we feel that advice and guidance for the client at the very early stage of design can be hugely beneficial when it comes to preparing for the submission of that application and hopefully avoiding these delays where possible. So this is where we see this role of the advisor coming in really, really helpful. I believe I'm now passing over to George Parker to discuss the impact on the changes, or the changes that had associated with the building control.
Thanks, Evan. Hi, everybody. So yeah, today I'm just hoping to cover key changes and the changes from the legislative October changes last year and how they've specifically impacted building control sector, as well as those engaging with building control. So I've picked out 6 key changes to go through today. So first one that's probably most notable is the government have created a new national regulator called the Building Safety Regulator. One of their responsibilities is to regulate all building control bodies and maintain a register of building control inspectors. The regulator are the default building control body for all projects relating to higher risk buildings. So it's important to note that for high risk buildings, clients and design teams can no longer choose their building control body as they could do prior to the changes coming in. They now have to apply to the Building Safety Regulator for their building control service. Another important change is the emphasis now on competence across the industry, but today I'm going to speak specifically on the impact to building control. So from the 6th of July this year, all building control surveyors must pass or must have passed an approved competency validation assessment in order to continue to practice. And once passed, they will be placed on a national register of building inspectors. So there's 4 different levels of competency validation that building control professionals can apply for. Classes 1 to 4. So class 1 is a trainee level category. So that's working under supervision in all of their restrictive functions and activities, which is the lion's share of the normal expected building control work in terms of signing certification, issuing documents, plan checking and site inspections. Class 2, classes 2 and 3 are the registered building inspector categories. So class 2 covers buildings with the highest floor up to 18 metres, and that's all building types, but there's different categories within the class 2, so from A to F. And then class 3, as I mentioned, is another registered building inspector category with buildings with the highest floor over 18 metres. And again, there's different categories within that, depending on the type of the building. And class 4 is a technical manager category. So each of those categories, if a building inspector passes that competency validation, any of those, either class 2, 3 or 4, they are given the title of a registered building inspector, which is now a protected title. Now, the competency validation has impacted the building control sector hugely, and there are a lot of experienced and highly regarded building control professionals who have left the building control sector as a result of having to pass an assessment of competence if they wish to continue to practice. Another change worth mentioning is to approved inspectors. So approved inspectors have had to re-register with the building safety regulator to become registered building control approvers. So it's a change in their title. And this has led to a number of well-known approved inspectors not renewing their license or entering voluntary liquidation, which has caused their clients to have to revert their building regulation applications to the local authority or another building control authority. It could be the regulator under the current regime, depending on the timing of that, which, subject to the information made available by the approved inspector, can be quite a complex and time-consuming process for clients. One important change, which I think has probably slipped under the radar a little bit, is the cultural change of approach from building control. And I really wanted to mention this because I think it's clearly impacting industry more widely and anybody who has a level of engagement with building control. So the Grenfell Inquiry report, as Emily mentioned, came out on the 4th of September, found that the design teams previously saw building control as more of an advisory service, in some cases part of the design team. And the building safety regulators redefined the role of building control, resulting in a cultural shift in the approach by building control bodies. So this has led to an emphasis being placed on enforcement and regulation rather than supporting designers to achieve compliance, as it perhaps once was. And some have referred now to building control having more of a policing role, adopting a similar approach to that of the HSE. So building control and in support of that, building control now have strengthened direct enforcement powers that have been given to them since October 2023. So the impact of this change has been felt by both building control profession and project teams. So with the new duty holder responsibilities, which are set out in the amended building regulations, this places responsibility on designers and contractors to demonstrate their competence and to understand the building regulation requirements that apply to their projects. And as a result, some designers and contractors are now employing building control professionals to help them achieve or help them deliver on their responsibilities, which clearly has a further added, that impact has had further added to the shortage of registered building inspectors working in building control roles nationally. So another change has been relating to the handover process, and there's been changes to the information requirements for fire safety information, which is the Regulation 38 information, and in relation to compliance declarations, which now have to be signed by all duty holders and submitted to building control when the completion certification is requested. There are additional requirements as well for high risk buildings, including hard stop gateways, which Evan touched on earlier, meaning work cannot start before the building safety regulator approves the proposals, and the building cannot be occupied until the building safety regulator are happy that the requirements have been met and that's been demonstrated through the gateway process. So throughout the building control process, duty holders will need to demonstrate to the regulator how they intend to comply, how they are complying, and how they have complied with the duties of it at each stage. And the duties are defined within the amended building regulations for each of those duty holders. And the compliance declaration signed by all duty holders is required upon completion. That's it from me. I believe I'm handing back to Emily.
Thanks, George. Thanks, everybody. That was a really insightful roundup of not only what Atkins Realis are doing, but the broader landscape in relation to the Building Safety Act. So I'd like to ask our guests to join us now for the next part of the session, where we'll go through some questions. And the first questions that I've got are for Arita and for Supe. So Supe, let's start with you. So as a design and build contractor, how have design and build contractors responded to being asked to be a PD? And how have you found the appointment of architects to fulfill that duty beyond stages 3 and 4?
Thank you for those questions. We have responded in various ways to differing requests, essentially from our clients. Obviously, the first response is actually the client should retain this responsibility as BRPD. But where that isn't possible, where they are looking for us to take that lead, then of course we'll be happy to take that lead on and appoint a competent person to do that. So there are, I guess, 2 levels of response depending on the different clients that we work with across the public and private sector. Where we have struggled as a B&D contractor is obviously where we would look for that competent person and reaching out to the architectural profession on those projects. We have had a mixed response. Some really positive responses from some architects where they're happy to take on that role and kind of put forward that responsibility. But we have also had some architects who are, for various reasons, reluctant to take on that responsibility. In those instances, we are unfortunately being pushed down the route where we would have to look for an external third party, so someone external to the design team. And again, we've struggled with that as to how we ensure competency and ensure a level of quality return on those competency kind of validation, as it were. So there are, we are taking the approach that yes, of course, we're happy to take on this responsibility, but depending on the design team that we have, depending on the client that we have had to adjust our response in accordance.
Great, thank you. Arita, I'll come to you next. So as the chair of the NLA's technical competence panel, what would you say the feedback around these sort of changes in the Building Safety Act have been from the panel? And then do you think that the profession could be more collaborative around this as well?
Thanks, Emily. I think the feedback has been quite broad-ranging. Obviously, the Technical Competency Panel at the NLA has been running for 4 years, so before the Building Safety Act was fully in place and now that it is. So a lot of the key themes have already been discussed around skills, education and competency, and what that competency looks like for different actors across the built environment. I think from the landlord side, certainly viability has been a key issue. So the Building Safety Act and also changes to the building regulations have involved things like second staircases, etc., which have meant that developments have had to be paused. I think there's quite a lot of discussion around risk management and how the programme of design and build has changed and how you manage that. I think one of the things that hasn't really been touched on yet is how landlords are managing resident input, which is one of the key components of the Building Safety Act. I think that is still unclear as to how that might work in practice and in a meaningful way. I think from manufacturers, the feedback has been realizations that their responsibilities and liabilities have shifted, and different manufacturers are dealing with that in different ways. Certainly the CE marking and testing side of manufacturing responsibilities is still, I would say, in flux. We also spent quite a lot of time talking about procurement and how alternative or better ways of procuring building contracts might improve what the Building Safety Act in spirit is asking the industry to do, which is to have a deeper way of collaborating and a shared responsibility and risk management culture. And I think that has been quite a key piece of feedback that is coming from around the table from various people across the industry. We have also talked about safety in its more broader sense, and not just about fire safety culture, but also around toxicity, air quality, and other things that might impact the health and the safety of residents in buildings. One of our key recommendations, and we've written a white paper on this, is that it's very difficult at the moment to be up to date in terms of best practice and knowledge. So we have asked for a centre of excellence or a central portal where the whole industry is able to access the latest information about new materials, testing, and also recommendations from the various associations involved across the industry. So that's sort of a snapshot of the type of feedback we've had.
Great, thank you so much. And do you think we could sort of be a little bit more collaborative across the process?
I think that's been a general consensus from the panels that we've had across the past 4.5 years. I think collaboration in its various forms, including with residents, has been a really key feature. I'm not sure we've got that right, and certainly we've still got a long way to go, but that is the aim, and certainly this is the spirit of the Building Safety Act.
Brilliant, thank you. Luke and Supay, you both sort of have differing experiences in what consultants have given you to illustrate. Have you had, differing experiences in what consultants have given you to illustrate their competence? And will you be looking to sort of standardise that across your businesses going forward?
Yeah, morning everyone. If you want me to go first, Emily, I'm happy to. I'd say from our perspective, Unite students, obviously we've got a big pipeline of work ahead of us, trying to build student accommodations to a fixed opening month. What we're seeing from our consultants, both within our frameworks that we utilise sort of day in, day out for our delivery, is varying degrees. I think it was touched on earlier, varying degrees of sort of information quality when it comes to competency. And therefore the benchmark that's in the PAS document that I think that Evan was noted earlier is almost been used as us as a barometer to say, kicking back on those competency documents, saying that this is what you need to meet. If you don't meet this, you can't work with us effectively, and put the challenge back. The issue we're facing, is that effectively we've been using a lot of these consultants for many, many years. And actually it's almost like a regularization of the fact that we know they're competent, but now we need the paperwork to prove they're competent and do it in a different format. So as I say, architects from varying degrees and consultants are supporting that in various different ways, read between the lines as you will. But I think most of them are pulling with the spirit of things, which is providing information which effectively unlocks the work and allows everyone to continue building. So.
Great, thank you. Supay, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so from our point of view, as the wider KIA, we're looking to essentially standardise the questions that we're asking. So we've formulated essentially a framework of answers or questions that we'd like answers to provide the evidence. But as a first starting point, what we're also asking, although it's not a regulatory requirement, is that the BRPD should actually be on one of the registers that are coming through, and that gives us a bit more certainty in terms of a third party check that actually the BRPD is competent and has proved competency to a third party as well. So that gives us that additional comfort. Again, we're having various levels of response to this. So I think it's just a process that we're going through at the moment. Like I say, just within the whole of Kier, obviously, quite a big organisation, that we just want to have a standardised approach to this, and we're just working through that now. Again, like Luke says, we have some consultants that we historically work with, and we know that they are competent, but it's actually just getting that formalisation in place.
Great, thank you. And sticking with the two of you, actually, how have you found the application process under the Gateway 2 regime in terms of like the information that's required, level of detail, that sort of thing, BSR interaction, and the programme sort of application of timescales?
Cool. It's hot topic at the minute. From a Unite perspective, we've got one application in. We've got another 4 to 5 that are going to go in by the end of year, and we're trying to reposition to understand what's the best way of achieving a 12-week determination. That's the goal for us, which therefore unlocks the ability to enter into the main contract and thus deliver it for our academic year opening. That to us is sort of the most important factor right now in this, in relation to safeguarding our pipeline and be able to continue constructing and to support the universities that we need to. At the moment, we're seeing on that scheme, that scheme particularly, 7 weeks for a validation effectively, and then to be subsequently devalidated a week later. So we then had to resubmit. Other schemes we're seeing across speaking with other consultants, we're using a few third-party BSR PDs. I've got a number of crib notes that are being issued to me each month, updating on the stats that sort of ever relayed there. But effectively, I'm seeing 20 to 30 weeks flux, with a sweet spot seems to be 25 weeks. There seems to be a correlation I'm seeing between the level of detail, the level of design detail that's being submitted, and the determination periods, which it's not sort of rocket science, but what I'm seeing is that obviously these applications that have been made at stage 5 is almost being perceived as almost that gold standard. Those the ones, the data that I've received are generally getting through in say circa 20 weeks. Those that are sort of deemed to be silver, as we're using internal these analogies, at stage 4 with an element of contractor design portions, are sort of getting more of a challenge, having far more extended periods, getting frequent extensions. That's not to say that's the hard and fast rule. That's just what we're seeing from our relatively small pool of applications and using the consultants we do. So, at the moment, we're just not seeing that 12 weeks. And again, that's a real concern for us. And that is say that level of design detail seems to be pushing towards stage 5. That impacts us from a developer more from the abortive that's needed, obviously, prior to commencing on site. Also, the manner in which we procure projects, which are traditionally design and build, it's almost sort of, making us reflect on that procurement approach to understand, is it really the right one now, given these changes? And that's something, there's some sort of bigger questions that are coming out of all of this change. So as we're seeing it, we're sort of waiting, watching, listening, and getting all the feedback from these types of forums and those from our professional advisors, and trying to constantly reposition our applications to give them the best chance of getting through. I know the regulator's always taken the stance that they're not going to tell us what good is effectively, and it's up for industry to produce that. And I feel like that's that process we're going through right now. But for safeguarding projects and effectively unlocking developments, that's proven quite a challenging balancing position for us. So yeah.
Thank you. Supe, from the Kier perspective?
Yeah, I absolutely completely agree with what Luke has just said. It's a very difficult position to be in, particularly one of my colleagues I was discussing yesterday put it quite eloquently. It feels a bit like when you're making that submission, you're going at warp speed. You're on the Enterprise going at warp speed, and then suddenly the engine switch off and you're drifting through space. So it would be much more comforting if we had that interaction and engagement with the regulator, but obviously by design, there is no engagement, and it does feel a bit like you're just drifting through space without any feedback and really not knowing what the end date is. So yes, we have all got kind of 12 weeks in the programs, in the resourcing. But if, like Luke says, the feedback we're getting from industry is, 20, 30 plus weeks, we are literally just drifting through. And I think that's probably from a contractor point of view, that's the biggest risk that we're having to manage at the moment. And certainly from a resource point of view, you know, like I say, you've got a team going full speed, and then literally it stops. That's the balance that we're trying to get at the moment, is actually how do you mobilize a full design team internally and externally. So, you know, I appreciate this is also difficult for the architects and engineers involved as well. It's that unknown, which I think is very difficult at the moment. I mean, again, within KIR, we're trying to position ourselves as, with the gateway submissions, to be more standardised. So the level of information and the engagement of CDP packages, etc. We're trying to find a level of information for the submission, but that's as much as we can do. Like I say, once you've submitted with complete radio silence from the regulator, I think that's what we're finding quite difficult at the moment, and it's definitely contrary to how we would normally work. So the engagement, collaboration would be welcome, I'd say.
Yeah.
Thank you. Luke, did you want to add something to that, or just agreeing?
No, it's always nice to hear other people. Effectively, sometimes you feel like you're in a bit of a silo, aren't you? Everyone's dealing with this issue on their own and from a different perspective point. But actually, there's lots of commonality when you talk to people across industry in various different forums, that we're all facing into the same issue, which is we want to do the right thing. We want to get the best application forward, and it's just trying to work out what that is the challenge right now. With at the same time as maintaining the other balancing elements, which is risk, viability, you know, and maintaining a critical path program, which is, you know, key for us. So
that feeds in quite nicely to my next question, actually, which was for the three of you, Luke, Supe, and Arita, to hear how you think, sort of, whether the industry feels confident with the new information requirements throughout the building control process, and has the guidance been sufficient?
Luke, do you want to go first?
Yeah, well, you know, it's from my perspective, probably from the feedback I'm receiving from all the teams across the board, is that there's a concern that the clarity isn't there about exactly what's needed. And as I say, right now, as we sort of touched on a moment ago, we're learning from others' failures, effectively, those that are being rejected, the feedback that's coming from the regulator, that is then being passed around, as I see it, in different circles, and allowing you to then adjust your application to make it the best it can be. So as I see it, the next year at least is going to be a stabilisation about what is best practice, and I think there needs to be probably more of an industry position on sharing that information, whether that's being collected by the regulator and saying, look, from the regulator, everyone on a HSE bulletin, this is the best thing we recommend for your application. You know, at the moment, I don't think, my opinion is the guidance isn't there to the point that allows us to have the comfort to commit to projects effectively, you know, to give us that comfort to unlock that development potential that there is out there. So,
I mean, I'd agree with Luke. I think that there is definite not confusion, but inconsistency across the industry about what level of detail is required, when it's required, and whether or not the feedback that you get back from the building safety regulator will be received in a timely manner in order to respond. So I think those are the big unknowns about the information that's required. I think the other side of information gap, I would say, is what I mentioned before that we spoke about, that the building industry is constantly changing, and as new materials come on the market, as new methods of testing of materials emerge, I think that information is not being accessed in a kind of timely way. So only just yesterday we were alerted by a kind of second-hand way of a change to a very key material in a building, and it took us, you know, a good few hours to kind of get to the bottom of it and to try and understand whether or not the manufacturer had withdrawn their particular material because of safety concerns. So you know, there is still a kind of massive knowledge gap in terms of what designers in particular and contractors are specifying, and how that then gets fed back to the building safety regulator is an unknown, certainly.
Great, thanks both. Supe, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, I fully agree with what Arita and Luke were saying. We're absolutely finding the same thing. I think I mean, certainly events like this and learning from peers at the moment is the only way that we've been able to do that. It would be certainly good if we had a lot more guidance as to what is required from even bodies like the RIBA would be helpful, so there's more of a coherent response. But at the moment, I think we're learning from each other as to what's needed, which has been great. But it does feel like we're on stabilizers at the moment and not yet ready to ride alone. So I think more industry guidance, certainly from the bodies involved, would be much more helpful.
Brilliant, thank you. Conscious of the time, so I'm going to take some of the questions that we've had from the audience now. Thanks for getting these all sent through. So the first one we're going to come to, and I think I'll direct this one to you, Stephen. While there's a focus on the difference between PD duties and the competencies under the CDM and the BSA, are there guidelines available for designers? Oh, can't hear you, Stephen. Not sure if your mic's off.
Can you hear me now?
Perfect.
Yeah, there we go. Okay. I was just going to pick up the point that Supoy and Rita and Luke were making before, that we would support that idea of collaboration. I think obviously clients from our perspective are developers, how they collaborate, but also designers in terms of architects and other designers, how they collaborate and being willing to share good experiences and bad experiences of level of detail that has been accepted versus not. So again, I don't know where that will go, but I think it's important that we do that. In terms of answering the question about guidelines, we would always say just go back to the legislation. Whenever you read the description of the duty that's in part 11 of the regulation, it is quite clear. Whenever you then go into the past documents, you can find further guidelines in there. But then also you'll go back to your professional bodies, whether that's RIBA, ARB, RICS, CIBSE, whoever it might be. Again, there is guidance there. And like we've just said, that collaboration, kind of reach out to your peers. I think that's the only way we're going to find out exactly the level of detail that we need.
Great, thank you. And then the next one we've got, there was an intention, or the intention when CDM 15 was introduced for the PD role to be taken up by architects. That didn't happen. Is it more likely for BSA PD? And I think, Richard, you probably be good to take that one.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Emily. Just going back on Stephen's point around the last question, I think as well, just specifically around designer, the role is designing stuff that's compliant with the building regulation Schedule 1. So it's identifying what your design package needs to comply with under the building regulations, and then working to design to be compliant with that. So it's then having the competence, enough knowledge as part of that competence, enough knowledge to understand how you apply the building regulations to what it is you're designing. That's kind of a key part of that. But just to pick up on that last one, this question, I think that some architects are running towards it and some are running away from it. And I think there was a big question around design and build when this all came out as well, and whether design and build contractors should pick that up. And ideally for us, it's people in the position to be able to be part of the design team and to be able to have an input and to be able to influence the design. I do think some designers, we've heard various reasons, are running away from it, the role because of, from insurances. We've heard others say that they still think it should be a third-party role because they think it should be someone that checks the design and ensures it's compliant with the building regulations. But hopefully, we did speak to one designer a little while back that said, we need to do this because if we don't do this, then we'll only have ourselves to blame when the architecture role is further and further eroded from where it has been originally. So it is definitely something they need to pick up. But just conscious as well that, go back on my point earlier, it won't always be an architect that is, in the best position to be the lead designer on a project. RIBA are very focused on that, and that's right for their members. But mechanical, electrical led packages, typical on data centers. A lot of, like I said earlier, a lot of the work we do, building surveyor led projects where the building surveyors specifying it, they're project managing it, they're very small works. The building regulations apply to those projects as well, and they need to be in a position to ensure that they're designing and ensuring that a contractor is building it in compliance with the building regulations. So I'm hopeful that designers will pick it up, will work towards it. They might do that after there's a bit more guidance, a bit more comfort. We've had a bit more time under our belt to be able to get on and deliver this as well.
Great, thank you. Next question we've got, wondering if anyone on the panel has had experience with the BSA after Gateway 2, or how do you expect potential changes on site to be dealt with now after Gateway 2 approval?
I'll say, Emily, from our perspective, we haven't had any experience yet of after Gateway 2. But obviously that's a key risk that we're trying to track and understand, again, for purposes of working out the academic year openings and the contractual mechanisms. The new JCT 2024 only had a very light touch in terms of the Building Safety Act, and really did only a small nod towards the PD and principal designer and principal contractor role, but didn't make any allowances for extension times based on major changes or minor changes and performance of the regulator and how that interacts. We've got some live examples at the moment that we're trying to scenario test around. If there's a piling clash, an existing building that needs to demolish, you've submitted your piling design based on assumed piling locations, midstream, they clash. Is that a minor or a major change? And technically, probably based on the definition of it, I would suggest probably a major change. And therefore, you could be in a position where you've got to move your pile 100 mil to the right or 200 mil to the right, and thus have to stop on that element of works for the determination period, which after just entering the Gateway 2 to then meet with these challenges throughout the build, it is much a live concern that we're tracking and trying to understand and are seeking guidance on from consultants and also from the regulator, because we're keen to understand on the definitions are still quite woolly, and are fairly sweeping, and some practical examples. Again, it feels like similar to the Gateway 2. Others are going to have to go through that pain and that information be shared to enable that definition to be detailed. But again, no live experience right now, but it is something I think we should all be live to. That this is a continuing process, as well as Gateway 3 at the end, and then the HRB registration as well, which is another challenge.
Thanks, Luke. I think we've probably got time to do one more question, which probably follows on from that one that you've just answered, actually, Luke. So, thoughts on responsibility for the Gateway 3 completion certificate?
Again, from my perspective, Emily, it's been a bit of a hot debate at the moment with contractors trying to agree, effectively, if Gateway 3 forms part of their, practical completion criteria. Effectively, there's a quandary around, PC, is that linked to effectively Gateway 3 and thus occupation, and there's different views being taken by different contractors, obviously, and how you, again, sort of leaning more into the contractual focus, how do you structure that in a contract whereby you could be delayed for Gateway 3, in our instances, stopping occupation of a student development of 1,000 beds with a fixed intake date, and who's liable for the downside position in the event that there's lack of performance from the regulator, for example, and all the quality information's inaccurate and has caused that rejection. And as I say, both the client feeds into that, as well as the contractor and the design team. So I have to say, it's something that I'm seeking advice on, and we're evolving and discussing it in a spirit of collaboration with the contractors that we work with. But yeah, it's definitely another hurdle as part of this overall view in terms of the Building Safety Act impact on construction programs, effectively, which is substantive.
Great, thanks, Luke. Does anyone else want to add anything? Any thoughts on that before we wrap up?
If I may, we did speak to a client the other day, and they've been advised by the insurers that they don't give PC until after they've got the building assurance certificate, which is the next step on from the PC certificate. So you need your safety case report. I mean, that, you're talking, 12 weeks, whatever, for Gateway 3, but you could be looking at, maybe a year, a year or so. I don't know how long it takes the building safety regulator to review the safety case report for the building. So I think maybe I don't know whether that's come about as a very risk-averse position or as a lack of understanding of the gateway and the handover requirements, but just something to be mindful of, the difference between practical completion certificate, completion certificates from building control at Gateway 3 and then building assurance certificates, which are the next part to ensure that the building's safe for the occupants to live in, and there's a plan in place to manage it going forwards.
Definitely, yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. And that's taken us up to time. So thank you so much to all of our speakers for joining us for this morning's session, and to our audience as well. So that just leaves me to say, keep checking back to the NLA website for more events coming up across the year. As I mentioned at the beginning of the session, we will be posting a short poll after the session is finished, so please do answer those questions and have a fantastic weekend. Let's hope the rain stops, and we hope to see you at another NLA event very soon. Thanks, everyone.